Did you want to start off with the?
Yeah, yeah, sure. I'll introduce a little bit, right? So I see a lot of friendly faces on here. So thanks everyone who's from the ISC chapter, the New Jersey chapter. I know that a lot of you have joined base around that. We've got a good chunk of people who aren't. So I just wanted to use the opportunity to mention our ISC squared chapter in New Jersey. We're becoming a very large organization. I think 3 years ago we were 40 people. We're over 400 now, as most of you know, who I recognize all the faces on here. And feel free to turn on cameras, everyone. I'm sure it makes it a little more interactive for Shezhad. Just wanted to kind of explain what the chapter is a little bit. We're a security chapter. Basically, what that means is that we get people together. In our industry, we have, a couple mainstays of what we do is our monthly meetings that we have, which is happening next Thursday. We have social events just to get everyone together. Those are always good fun. We run a mentoring program where we get people together. I know there are a good number of people on here who participate and do that. Thank you for all of you who do that, and even some people who help. Hey, Harry, I know we were talking the other night. So thanks everyone who puts in that effort and helps there, but that's awesome. We run a conference. So there's a conference that I'm sure many more people on here are starting in June. So that's going to be an in-person conference that we've run now for quite a while. I think Ken was having us guess at how many years that has run. It surprised me. But it's a really good event. It was exceptional last year when I attended. And if you're not part of ISC Squared, it's a $75 annual fee. That's all we ask. We do a lot of content along these lines. We get a lot of great things introduced every month, as I'm sure if you want to ask any questions in chat as this is going through, please ping me or just ask in general chat. There are lots of people who are members of our organization here. Oh, right. So my name is Matthew Lang. I'm the mentoring chair on our board, so I'm heavily involved there. And that's all I've got, Shezhad. This is a topic that I love. It's one of my passions. So I'm really curious to learn more about it, as we all are all the time. That's why we're here. So whenever you're ready, kick it off. Thank you for giving me a couple minutes.
Hey, no, thank you, Matt. Let me share my screen. And if you're looking at my video, if you see me looking up and around, because I have two monitors here, so that's why I'm looking up so I can see the screen. But at the same time, I want to make sure people have the time to ask the questions. So I mean, I know we go till about 7, but at any point in time as I go through this and talk about DMARC, please feel free to put a question into the chat. I'm looking at the chat window also. It just makes it more interactive, and if I can answer the question while I'm on the topic, then I'll answer the question right there and then. Otherwise, I may wait till the end. But please put in your questions there, so that way also you don't forget about it either. So you don't have to wait till the end for it. So my name is Shezhad Mirza. I'm the Chief Security Officer and VP of Organizational Services at a small organization called CyberWA. And just really quickly, what CyberWA is and who I am. So my background here, these are the different organizations that I've worked with. I started off with my career as a SOC analyst at Symantec, worked my way up to managing the Security Operations Center. Symantec eventually got the consulting side, decided to close shop at that time, and we were working with New York State. But they were also at the same time creating the Multi-State Information Sharing and Analysis Center at the MSISAC. I'm sure some of you have already heard of that. But they merged with the Center for Internet Security, took all the Symantec folks that were working in the Ops Center and hired them to do and build the Ops Center for the Multi-State Information Sharing Analysis Center. So there I was the head and director of that Security Operations Center. Worked there for a number of years, and then eventually went to Ernst & Young, was a security manager there for a few months, and then went to Global Cyber Alliance. Global Cyber Alliance is a small not-for-profit organization as well that works on a global level. They produce different types of things and basically looking at ways of eradicating and mitigating and finding those gaps that people don't really think about. And that's where I started the whole DMARC process and learning about DMARC and really focusing on education and awareness from the around DMARC. So this whole presentation was really something I created while my time at Global Cyber Alliance, and you'll see some of the resources I'm going to share at the end will be pointing actually back to Global Cyber Alliance. But now I work for CyberWa, and what CyberWa is we're a small organization that basically is providing like cybersecurity bodyguard type activities for high wealth individuals, C-level individuals, celebrities. But then we're also doing organizations as well. So that's something that I was brought on last year to help with organizations and help do like risk assessments, provide different types of CISO type level experience and advisory capacities to these organizations. And various other types of activities. So I'm not going to go into that too much. You can go to cyberwa.com and look up more information there. But what I really want to focus on is what the topic is today, right? And that's going to be about DMARC. So before we even get into DMARC, just a quick reminder, I'm sure all of you have know of phishing. You've seen it many, many times. You've seen emails come in and phishing is just still one of those types of attacks that are just constant. It's consistent, it's increased and decreased throughout the years, and it just won't go away. No matter what we do, and no matter how hard we've been trying to battle it and fight it, it just keeps coming in. And then now with AI in play, it's just going to get even more sophisticated. But the idea is that it's not just phishing, it's not just receiving an email, right? It leads to other types of activity. It leads to that malware or ransomware type of infections. It leads to fraud. It leads to theft of PHI type information. But it's just getting so much cleaner in terms of how they're being presented. They look like they're actually coming from that organization, right? They still get more sophisticated. The language is much better, right? It's not in the past. It used to be where there's a few letters that were misspelled, or it was very broken English or broken Spanish or whatever language that it's in. But now it's much harder because now it looks like if it's actually coming from UPS because the message itself looks like an email that UPS actually sends. And you'll be questioning, is it actually UPS or is it actually some sort of scam or some link? But then the other aspect is the from sender address, right? That's the part that's getting spoofed a lot as well. We're seeing either different types of spoofing, and I'll talk about those spoofing a little bit later. But just to take from the FBI 2020 Internet Crime Report, right? BEC, business email compromise, spoofing, phishing, they're still in the top there. Surprisingly enough, BEC actually dropped. In the past few years, it was number one. But based on the FBI report, it actually dropped down to number two. I'm sure at some point it'll probably come back to, but it'll at least hover within those, at least the top five, if not the top two. But I put spoofing and phishing in there as well, because really when it comes to any type of phishing type email, I mean, it is, there is some level of business email compromise. Phishing tends to get incorporated into business email compromise. Same with spoofing, even though there are different types of activity and there's different types of spoofing that are involved. But also again, in terms of costs, right? So phishing is still at the top, right? Over 300,000 victims were impacted by phishing. Right. And then it dramatically drops down from there, down to personal data breach. I mean, it's a huge drop. I mean, again, it's the FBI report. They probably don't have all the information, and it's just US based in this case, but that is still a large amount and a large type of activity. And it is a global problem, right? It's hard to say that, BEC or phishing type of attacks are coming from one specific location. They're coming from multiple locations all over the world. I mean, and it really, a lot of it depends on what type of activity is going on at that point in time, right? So like right now with the Ukraine-Russia war going on, right, we see a lot of activity around that, a lot of phishing attempts, donate here, or click here for more information on how to do, some way to help Ukraine. We see that a lot of activity around that. Then with, China and Taiwan, we're probably going to see a lot of things going on in terms of activity there as well. So, so just so you know, so this report, I put the link at the bottom of the screen, is from Agari. So it's from Agari's report, the threat intelligence brief that they have. It's an interesting read. They break it down fairly well in terms of in terms of how in each of the locations. I'm just giving the overall map. but they'll break it down by North America, Europe, Asia, and give them a lot more data in that report. But there are different types of spoofing, right? Especially when it comes to email. And you've seen these. I'm sure all of you have seen some level of these at some point. So you see display name spoofing, right? Where you see then just looking at the name of it, it says that person's name. It says the CFO's name, the CEO's name, that's right in that email. But then you go behind the scenes and you look at, actually really look at it, it's a Yahoo address or a Hotmail address or a Gmail address. We've been seeing, I've personally been seeing a lot from Gmail as of late, pretending to be the CEOs of various organizations. But it's a Gmail account, and it won't be necessarily the person's name in there. It'll be just some random name at gmail.com. The assumption is that people are just going to look at the name and just act on the name. And a lot of people tend to do that. There's lookalike domains, right? Where they try to actually take the company's domain name and make it, use similar characters to that name, right? So in this case, an R and an N. And some, when you're looking at smaller font, that R and N will look like an M, right? Instead of an I, they'll use a 1, or an L, they'll use a 1, because an L and a 1 typically the characters look the same on the screen. So, and then the last one is domain spoofing, right? This is where they're actually using the domain name. So it's spoofing in the sense that they're now being able to, they're not compromising your systems, they're not compromising your servers and sending mail there. So it's not an account compromise that's going on in this situation. This is where they're actually standing out an email server and pushing out emails using your actual domain name. And they can do that. They're not expecting to get a response back. I mean, if they, somebody attempts to respond back to it, in most cases it'll crash, or it'll just bounce back, or unless they're actually using a real person or a real individual's email account that's there. But the idea here is just to get the email out and have people read it and click on the links, download the attachment, click on the attachments, and do that type of activity. That's the kind of thing that happens with domain spoofing. And we've seen this happen before. So when you remember with the pandemic, obviously that happened when the World Health Organization was trying to get out news about COVID, their domain was actually being used. And it wasn't email that was being sent by the World Health Organization. It was actually being sent by malicious actors. So they're using who.int, at who.int, their actual official email address, to send out this, and have done numerous types of attacks this way during the pandemic. Because, why not? Take advantage of it. It's the World Health Organization. This is where we can take, they can take advantage of that. And this is where they, a lot of attackers will take advantage of the situation based on the type of activity that's going on, or what's going on at that point in time. So one solution here is DMARC. So DMARC stands for Domain-Based Message Authentication, Reporting, and Conformance. And what it, in essence, is doing is it's protecting your domain, right? It's protecting your specific domain that you own, whatever .com, .org, .net domain that you own. That's what it's protecting, and it's preventing others or unauthorized use of that domain, right? And some of you may be thinking, for those of you familiar with some of the email protocols that are out there, there is a protocol that sounds just like the same thing that it's doing. I'm going to be mentioning that as well. But again, focusing on DMARC. So with DMARC, so there's actually two parts to DMARC, and I'm going to break down both parts. But what you're doing is you're using DNS, right? A DNS, you're creating a DMARC policy, and that policy is you as the sending organization, or you're going to create that policy. You have to publish that policy in your DNS. And that's what's going to say, like, this domain is being protected by DMARC. And it's going to say some other things as well in terms of how to handle reports and how to handle other situations. But the idea is that now when the receiving end gets an email from your domain, they're going to have something called DMARC verification that's going to go out and check, hey, does this organization, does this domain have a DMARC policy associated with it? Yes, it does. Okay, what does that DMARC policy say to do? Is this email that I'm receiving coming from an authorized source? And if it is coming from an authorized source, Okay, how should I handle it? If it's coming from an unauthorized source, how should I handle it? So this is all then on the sender. It's not up to the receiver then to try to figure out, is this domain, here's a domain. It looks like it's a legitimate domain, but is that domain, real, or is it someone that's in essence trying to send spam? So is it actually coming from that organization? So DMARC is going to prevent those spammers and phishers or unauthorized users. And sometimes it will actually prevent internal users from getting some third-party email services to use your domain. But the idea is really just to prevent the spammers and phishers from using your valid organization name in email fraud or in fraudulent type of activity. Because why do you want to do that? You want to increase the customer's confidence and trust. You want to protect the integrity of your brand, right? So yes, it's not only a security mechanism, but it's a trust building mechanism as well, right? So it has a two-factor aspect to it. And when you're implementing this, so that's why you want to implement DMARC. I mean, what kind of credibility that the World Health Organization have then at that point, especially when it got in and made the news that there's fraudulent emails or fraudulent messages coming and using that actual domain name. Now people stop trusting that. Now they stop trusting that type of message. I mean, that's also happens when it happened within the past with UPS and USPS. I mean, those messages you would get, but a lot of people are saying those are spam messages. But this is something that's going to help prevent and at least reduce that and mitigate that. So there's a question about, do both sides have DMARC policies on their MTAs? Both sides should have DMARC policies, yes. And I'll explain why a little bit later. So additional benefits of DMARC. So, I'm sure a lot of your organizations have consumers, or if you're part of the government, you have citizens that you're trying to protect. You have business partners you're trying to protect. So in this case, I said consumers, but and that's consumers, I mean, anyone who's receiving messages from you, you want to make sure that they're actually getting your message and your messages are actually getting to the inbox, not into the spam folders or being blocked by some spam filters at the organization's end. So in order for inbox protection to occur, there is something specifically called the DMARC verification. It is something that you do have to turn on, not create, turn on. So turn on, I mean, you're actually going to go into like a Cisco Iron port, or if you have Mimecast, the Mimecast gateways or email service gateways, security gateways, you have to go in there. There's going to be a DMARC verification option that you actually need to turn on. The number that here is 80%. I believe the number is actually much higher than that now at this point. That number is actually quite old. But 80% of the current total number of worldwide email accounts are actually protected by DMARC because they have DMARC verification. So those totals are based on Gmail, Hotmail, iCloud, Yahoo, and so on, because they're all actually have a DMARC verification implemented on their end. So anyone you're sending, so if you as an organization are sending to those accounts, they're protected by DMARC verification. You have a DMARC policy in place for your organization, you're increasing the chances of your messages of actually making the inbox of those accounts. So that's where deliverability comes into play. Right. So now with deliverability, you're now again making that insurance that you're going to actually get your messages delivered to the inbox, and they're not going to go to the spam folders. Will that happen with every organization? That's still iffy because DMARC is just one layer, right? There's other layers that the organization will hopefully still have in place that you may not pass those particular spam filters, right? But at least you're increasing your chances of actually delivering those messages by implementing DMARC, especially with those Gmails and Hotmails and so on, and those users. And then visibility. Right, a lot of with an organization on your mail servers, whether your Exchange servers on-prem or off-prem, or if you're using some other tools, that the messages were sent, right? Messages left your mail server or whatever mail server. Those things are things that you can confirm that they actually left and the message had left. But on the receiving side, you don't know what's necessarily happening, right? unless you have like, they have read receipts or something like that, that turned on. Right. So, then you'll get the user will get a message back saying, oh yeah, the person read the message. But what DMARC does, it has a reporting mechanism, it's a reporting capability. And that reporting capability is not going to be as detailed as many people would want to have, right? And I'll show you an example of what the reports look like. But the reports are going to at least let you know where the messages are coming from. So what domain was being used, what servers were being used, with the IP address of where the messages were coming from, and then also give you information about DMARC and some other authentication mechanisms that DMARC uses to determine whether they passed or failed those authentication checks. So this way, at least it'll tell you that, okay, the messages were actually sent or the messages were dropped or what was going on with some of those messages. You will not know who the actual recipient is. So these reports will not give you the actual recipient or who sent the mail. You won't get message bodies or anything like that. So that's kind of information. You won't get the message details, but you'll at least get the message of whether the message was being blocked or rejected or dumped by DMARC, or if there's a DMARC was something that stopped there. So the two parts of DMARC, right? So the DMARC policy. So again, DMARC policy is what the sending organization will need to set up. The DMARC policy is using DNS. It's not using anything else. So the policy wise, it's DNS based. So you create, and I'll show you an example of what I believe hopefully I have. Yes, I will show you an example of what a DMARC record will actually look like. Right. So the DMARC record is a TXT record you create on your DNS. So whatever DNS that you're using, and that's where it's going to create. So that's in that situation, creating a DMARC policy for your organization is free, right? Because you already have DNS in place. You just have to get the DNS record you need to implement it, have your DNS team put it in place, and there you go. Now you have a DMARC record in place. So all organizations should do this, right? DMARC policy in place. This is what a recommendation is that all organizations need to, if you own a domain, whether it's email or not, you should have a DMARC policy on there.
Boo, come. Boo, boo. Hey, how you doing? Come on, Bill, let's go.
Hello.
Hi, how you doing, Pam? Good, good.
So DMARC.
One more time?
Give me, be sure, if you don't mind, just be sure everyone's on mute because we can hear some people. So DMARC verification. So DMARC verification is the other half. So DMARC policy is for people who are sending mail, right? Sending out messages, and you create that in DNS. DMARC verification is for everyone receiving messages. Okay, so DMARC verification is for the receiving side. So you as an organization, right? You're a sender and a receiver. So as a sender, you create the DMARC policy. As a receiver, you turn on DMARC verification. And where is DMARC verification enabled is on your email security system that you're setting it up on. So people who are people who know, if you don't have your own email security gateway, so if you're using like Office 365 or Google Workspace, they have that enabled for you by default. It's already turned on. But anyone who has like Cisco Iron ports, Mimecast type devices, Barracudas, you have to go into those and you have to manually turn this on. Otherwise, it doesn't do it. It's not on by default. And again, what will that do now once you have DMARC verification is going to check every single email that comes through. It's going to check that domain that email is coming from and make sure and see, does it have a DMARC policy? If it has a DMARC policy, it's going to check that policy. If it doesn't have the DMARC policy, it'll let it go through. But again, take into account the fact that your existing spam filters and other email protection mechanisms are still taken into account. So it's not just like, oh, it's DMARC, I don't need anything else. No, you still need your other you need your other email protection mechanisms in place. DMARC is just one layer that you're adding on top of this. So I have some myths. So that applies to it's a DMARC myth 1. So it's used on email domains only. When it was created and when it was defined, it was meant for email domains. That was the purpose of the folks that created DMARC, right? That's what they wanted to do. They were thinking about email protection. They were saying that we want to stop people from using our email, using our domain and spoofing our domain and creating these servers and sending out fake messages. So they got tired of that. They'd say that's one type of phishing attack that they can somehow control. So this is their mechanism of doing that. But eventually you realize that, look, every single domain is out there in the public, right? So if it's a publicly accessible domain, why can't it be used for email, right? Just because you haven't set up an MX server or an email server doesn't mean that it can't be used. Somebody can still use it for phishing attacks or spam type of attacks. So when you implement DMARC, don't just do it for your email domains, do it for every single public facing domain that you own. All right, key thing is public, because when I don't say public, people tend to do it for their internal domains, and that just breaks things. Don't do it for any internal domains. DMARC is meant for public facing, so internet facing type domains. So your website's domain, use that. If you have parked domains or domains that you're keeping, just may never use because they're lookalike domains, right? Because people tend to buy lookalike domains. Publish those and publish a DMARC policy for those. Those are nice, easy, quick wins to do those because you don't have to check for anything. There's no email usage in there. I see the pricing structure. I'll answer that a little bit later. It's hard to answer because everyone's different. So that's the quick answer to that. Now, in terms of authentication, so DMARC is a mechanism that's used. So it's conformance, reporting, and authentication. So what DMARC actually does is actually uses 2 other existing protocols that it uses for authentication. So yes, DMARC came after SPF did. So SPF actually came first, DKIM came, and then DMARC came afterwards. DMARC uses both of these in order to do the authentication. So you do need to use these in order for this to work properly. Do you have to have both set up? It depends on the situation. You can get away with having just one, but you have to make sure that at least one of these, SPF or DKIM, is set up 100% in order for this to work. Because if it's at 80%, things are going to break. So what do these do too? So SPF is your sender policy framework. This is what's going to be used to dictate and define what mail servers are actually authorized to send mail using your domain. So SPF is another TXT record that's being created. This will have, this will be listed based on IP addresses. It'll be listed based on domains. That's a whole nother beast in itself, to be honest with you. But that's a key thing to have and try your best to have in place. And I know people are asking about, well, what if you have like CRMs like HubSpot or Salesforce? Yes, I understand. It's understandable that what you want to do is those kinds of situations is you want to make sure that whatever information the third party provides in terms of SPF and DKIM, that's what you use. Don't just make it up. Don't go looking up HubSpot's SPF record and just copy it. No, they will provide you. These third-party tools and third-party email service providers will tell you specifically what that should be. Right? It's a common mistake that I see a lot of people do because like SendGrid, for example, gives you a specific one that's assigned to you. So if you go to SendGrid's SPF and you copy that, your things are going to break. Use the one that like SendGrid or HubSpot or Salesforce or whomever, they will provide it to you. Use that. And they do checks, which is a good thing about it as well. But the thing is with SPF was that, well, why can't you just use SPF? If it's going to authorize which mail servers you're using, that should be great. Well, the problem ends up being is especially if you start using things like SendGrid, Google Workspace, or Office 365, right? Because like Google, their SPF record that they give you is spf.google.com, and that's what they use for everybody. So anyone who has a domain or using their mail from Google Workspace, they all have the same spf.google.com. Outlook or Office 365, and I'm sure someone will correct me because I'm pretty sure I haven't seen one in a while, but it's like protection.outlook.com or something along those lines. The problem is that, well, if that's what the SPF record is then what's preventing someone to register or, Google Workspace and register an account there or get Office 365 and use your domain? Especially if it's all coming from the same mail server. So it should be fine. It should be authorized. The other thing with SPF is that the receiving side has to decide how to handle those messages. So they're the ones who are going to decide, well, if it's not on their SPF, what do we do with it? Do we quarantine it? Do we reject it? And most places they don't. Some places say, okay, you know what? If their SPF is wrong, then it's not on us. We're rejecting the messages. Some places will say, you know what? We can't take that risk, so we're not going to turn on SPF verification. Then the other one is DKIM. DKIM is domain identified mail. DKIM is in essence like a digital signature. I mean, it is a digital signature. It's a digital signature that's being added to all the messages leaving your domain. So it's kind of like PGP, right? But PGP is for personal level. It's the user level, right? So at the user, you have a digital signature. You sign every single message, private key, public key, and all that. I'm not going to dive into that because that'll be a whole nother story to tell. But DKIM is also public key, private key, right? But the layer that occurs is at the domain level. So every all messages leaving your email security gateway or email server, that's where the signature is put into the message and then sent out. And then the receiving side will get it. They're going to look up your public key that you published in DNS and determine, oh, hey, okay, does it match? Does all the information match up? Does the hashes match? If they do, yes. Only problem now is in DKIM, nothing defines what to do with that message if the DKIM signature authentication fails. It just says, attach it here. Here's our key, check it and compare the two. Then again, now the receiving side has to figure out, what do I do with the message if it fails? If the authentication fails, do I drop it? Do I quarantine it? What do I do? Right? Because if there's something wrong or incorrectly set up at the other end, or they published something, or they turned on DKIM and they're signing it, but the public key isn't out there yet because DNS replication is taking too long. Those are the kinds of situations that occur when it comes with DKIM. So DMARC is using both. So it's saying, okay, let's use both of these. Let's use something to combine SPF and DKIM and have them check for both. But then again, now have the sender's policy is going to say, look, I need you to check SPF and DKIM, but if one of these fail or both of these fail, this is what you're actually going to do with the message. This way you don't have to worry about making the decision. I, as a sender, I'm going to make the decision for you, because whatever situation, my SPF and DKIM, if they're set up incorrectly, they're on me. But so I'm going to tell you what to do and how, and then I'll get a report back. And through that report, I'll figure out, oh, my SPF is incorrect or my DKIM isn't working. So I need to fix those issues and those situations. So when you create a DMARC policy, you have 3 levels that you can define. You can define none, quarantine, and reject. So when you're working and starting off with DMARC, always start with the lowest level being none. What that basically means is that you're setting up DMARC. You want to get reports because you want to find out, is my SPF set up correctly? Or is my SPF failing? Or where is it failing? Which mail servers are the ones that are failing? Right? So this way, DMARC policies and DMARC verification aren't going to be in play. Messages are going to go through. They'll still hit the whatever spam or filters or whatever the receiving side has. But at least the messages are still going to go through. But DMARC is not going to block it. But you, as a sending organization, will get the reports back, review the reports, and determine what needs to get fixed, because you want to move up to quarantine and hopefully be able to get up to reject. Because what quarantine will do is these SPF, DKIM, and alignments are failing, the message actually goes to the spam junk folder. With reject, if it fails these checks, the message is completely dropped and not delivered. Right? But the only way messages are going to get rejected is if you actually look at the reports. There are some servers out there that will actually send back a report back saying that due to your DMARC policy, this is why it was dropped. But it's not too many systems do that. That's still an area that's growing. But the reports are what are going to tell you, what you need to get fixed. What do you need to do with SPF? What do you need to do with DKIM? Are they passing? Are they failing? Are domains aligning? What's going on? And then work your way up to quarantine and reject. I've seen too many people just say, oh, let's go to reject. And that's where I think that could have been one of the things that somebody had mentioned, that when they put in the policy, it started blocking messages. That's going to happen. And it's happened to large financial organizations. They actually said, the IT shop said, hey, we know all the email servers that are being used because we're at IT. We have control of all the email servers that are being used. So we know all the ones that are approved, so we can set up our SPF correctly. We set up DKIM correctly. So they went straight to reject. What ended up happening was about a month or two later, they got a phone call from the EA of the CEO saying that the CEO's newsletters aren't going out. Some people are getting them, some people aren't getting them at all. So they went back and looked like, well, no, everything's working. Everything's sending fine. So they asked her, how are you sending these messages? Oh, we're using this third-party email providing tool because we need to send it out to over 100, people, and our email services, reduces it to like 50 or something like that. So she signed, they got an email. It says a third-party email service provider to send out these messages using their domain. And lo and behold, DMARC blocked it because it wasn't part of their SPF or it was not part of their DKIM. It was DMARC, as far as it was concerned, that was an unauthorized system. So what do they have to do? They had to roll back to none, get all the information to be able to set up that system and make sure that the SPF, DKIM, all that was set up correctly, waited properly, had them send out messages the next month send out the newsletters, check it. Is everything set up correctly? Looked at the reports, everything was fine. Then they went back up to reject. That's why we say, start off with none. Reports, I will admit, and I'll tell you right now, they're not fun to look at, but they're a necessity just for that reason. Because unless you're just starting off, you're a new startup organization, hey, you can probably go right up to reject. But if you've been established for quite some time, good chance that someone in your organization is using a third-party system that they haven't told you about. They haven't told IT about, because, hey, they can go up and sign up for it. They don't need IT's permission to sign up for it because they're using it's a completely different system that's outside of your ecosystem. So that's another good thing about DMARC. You can find out what all those systems and all those systems that are not, that IT doesn't know about, that people are using. And it's one way to blocking them from using it. So now they would have to come to IT and ask and say, hey, look, we're getting this email service provider. We need to do this, yada, yada, yada. And now they, there's a process. They have to go through that change control and do the process correctly. So how does DMARC work? All right, so we have two sides here. So like if I just split, so one side is the sending organization. The other side is the receiving organization. All right, so we'll say like with DMARC, so I'm CyberWA sending out email, cyberwa.com, and I'm sending email out to, let's just say gmail.com, so I don't pick on any organizations. So what'll happen is from the sender's perspective, so first thing is for an organization to do is to publish their DMARC record on the sending organization's DNS server, right? So on your own DNS server, your public facing DNS server, that's where you're going to put it in there, put in the TXT record, starting up policy none. For the sender, so the person typing out the message, this is completely transparent. There's nothing you have to install on their machines. There's nothing, no new type of software or some extension into their Outlook or anything like that. This is completely transparent to them. They just type out their messages like they're supposed to do and just hit send. They send the message to the email server, right? So the sending org's email server, this is where everything happens, right? This is where all the metadata, this is all the information that's being added to the headers of your emails. Like this is where we're sending, this is the IP address we're sending from. This is all the information, that we need to add to it. This is where the either the email server or the email security gateway is where the DKIM signing is going to happen as well. right? That's where the DKIM signature is going to get attached and the message is sent out. Now the receiving side. So first on the receiving side, so they don't say they do not have DMARC verification enabled whatsoever. So what happens? It just goes through all the other filters and checks that that server has and handles the message accordingly. All right. So now I just want you to make the assumption there is no other spam filters or anything like that. It's just DMARC. Okay. So what will happen is if that DMARC verification is enabled on the recipient's email server, that server or what, or the security gateway, wherever DMARC verification is enabled, is going to go out to the sending organizations and DNS and say, hey, look, this email, I see there's a DMARC section here. There's SPF and there's a DKIM signature on here. I need to check with you. I need to check your DMARC. I need to check your SPF. I need to check your DKIM and see what they say. Really, it's going to check DMARC first, check SPF, and so on. So again, depending on the situation, it doesn't have to be where SPF and DKIM fail, right? If your SPF fails and your DKIM passes, messages technically will still pass the DMARC policy. Okay. And that's another, I mean, I'm going to point you to other resources that where you can look at a chart that has that breakdown in terms of the combination that will work. But if both SPF and DKIM both fail, your DMARC policy is guaranteed to fail. And it will fail. And again, now, depending on the sending organization's policy, that's how the message is going to be handled. So if your DMARC verification is the first thing that happens and your policy is at reject and it finds that it's coming from an unauthorized source, it's going to reject that message. So unauthorized and the DKIM signature is incorrect, it's going to reject that. It's a completely different SPF domain. It doesn't match the DMARC domain it's supposed to be coming from. Things are going to get blocked. Right, so it's all depending on what the sender says. So now the receiving side doesn't have to worry about how to handle that message or accidentally letting messages through that could potentially be spam or spoofed. And then the last step is the receiving end will send reports back, assuming they want to send reports back. Not all receivers will send reports back, which is unfortunate. A lot of them are getting better though, which is good. Microsoft being one of them. Microsoft is now sending reports, and then Microsoft is actually now handling DMARC appropriately like they're supposed to, which is great news. Because in the past, what they did was anything that was a DMARC policy of reject, they would actually send to your quarantine. They would actually send it to your spam folder. But now they're handling it the way they're supposed to handle and they're supposed to do. So assuming DNS DMARC responses are cached and receiving, that depends on your receiving MTA. I mean, if it can handle that kind of situation, or if you want things going to quarantine, that's really up to how you set it up. For number 4 in the flow, how? So it's the public facing DNS. Right? Because email servers will have to go back and check the MX records of the sending domain to make sure it's coming from where it's supposed to be coming from. So it's your public facing domain, not the one that's private. So that's the DNS server that you're publishing this on. So like, what a browser will use, it's the DNS that where your website is, your website domain is published, right? Where your MX records are published. That's the public facing domain. So that's how they'll have access to sending organizations DNS server. And it's just a check, but it'll only do that check if you have DMARC verification enabled. Otherwise, it won't do that. So here's an example of DMARC DNS TXT record. So the host name will always start with _DMARC. Underscore is very key, very critical. If you just do DMARC, it's not going to work. _DMARC. And then these are the values. So the top one, the only reason I separate out the two, because I wanted to be able to talk a little bit about it. If you do the top one, you can get started and you get moving right away. Because what you're going to do is you're going to define V equals DMARC 1. V means version. There's only DMARC 1. I think they did that in case they decided to do a DMARC 2 or 3, but right now it's DMARC 1. P equals is your policy level. P equals none. P equals quarantine, or P equals reject. One of the three. Just make sure that's only those three right now. In the past, there used to be one called monitor or log. That does not exist anymore, right? So it's none. So this is where you define what your policy level is. P equals none, or P equals quarantine, or P equals reject. One of the three. RUA and RUF are the reports, and you're going to define where you're sending the reports to. So that's going to be an email address to within your domain, right? So like, DMARC at cyberwa.com, for example, for us. I don't think that's the one we use, but that's what most people tend to use is DMARC. They use a DMARC at or DMARC-RUA, DMARC-RUF at your domain. I'll explain what the difference is between the two in a bit. I just want to make sure I'm rolling because we only have 10 minutes. But that's what you need to do to get started. If you do exactly that, mail to : put in your domain's email address within your domain. I do recommend a group. Don't use your personal email at work. Why? Because you could get flooded with you'll be flooded with DMARC reports. You don't want that. Send it to a generic account. Send it to like a DMARC at type of account. Now the other things here are optional ones. If you don't use them, what I put there are some of your defaults. The only other one I want to call out are these last two that I put in red at the bottom. RI. RI stands for report interval. That's how often you will get the reports. That's 86,400 seconds. Why they chose seconds, I don't know. But right, 86,400 is 24 hours. All right, so in a 24-hour interval, you get reports. It doesn't mean exactly on the dot, like you'll get all these reports at noon. It's just the receiving side will send them within a 24-hour period from when they receive messages. SP stands for subdomain policy. So if you have subdomains, whether used for email or not, you can put in a policy there. And it follows the none. If you do not use SP for your subdomains, the default is to use the P equals. So subdomain, so like cyberwa.com, sales.cyberwa.com. That's a subdomain, right? Marketing.cyberwa.com. That's a subdomain. If I do not define SP equals reject, whatever the P tag defines, that will be the policy. That applies to subdomains as well. So why had SP equals reject? Because some people do use subdomains for email. So they just gave you an option that if the top level domain's ready to go to reject, you can put in SP equals none. So that way the DMARC policy doesn't apply to the subdomains until you create a DMARC policy for each one of those separately, which you can do. Oops. Now the reports. So somebody asked, what are the differences between the two types of reports? There's aggregate reports, RUA, aggregate reports, RUF, are forensic or failure reports. And what do they do? Both of them obviously will be different. The one you want to get and the one that gives you all the information that you're looking for is aggregate reports. That's the one that's going to give you the IP address that's sending those messages using your domain name. That's the one that's going to tell you whether SPF is passing, failing, and aligned. It's going to tell you if DKIM is passing, failing, or aligned. It's going to tell you if DMARC is passing or failing. And it's also going to tell you, the receiving side, who got the report, who's sending you the report back. That's the type of information you're going to see in there. The forensic report is going to be the one that is actually the full-blown message that's failing. So what it's failing is it's failing either an SPF checks or it's failing DKIM checks. So the thing is, it's forensic reports. You're not going to see them if you see them at all. The idea behind the forensic report was to help do the analysis of it. So if it's failing DKIM, who sent the message and who received the message and what exactly, what could be failing, it gives you the header information. Problem with that is that, privacy, right? Because now somebody who may be who shouldn't be seeing some messages that are being sent by, people within the company, there's a risk of them seeing those messages. Right, those messages could have PII. It could be a message where that's just an HR message between HR and an employee, or something that they shouldn't be seeing. So there's a ton of privacy concerns around the forensic report. So that's why if you see one, typically ends up being, it's a spam message that you'll actually get, then those are the ones that I've mainly seen. But in the beginning, I've seen organizations when they use forensics, and I'm saying you should still turn them on, right? You should still turn them on because they can be helpful, but you may not get any. I've some reports, forensic reports I've seen actually contain that it has a full-blown message. It had an invoice attached to it. You get the attachments as well. And it threw me off when the first time ever seeing them, like, why am I getting these messages from this other organization for invoices? And I'm seeing the invoice to toss, and like later on it clicked, oh, these are the forensic reports I'm actually getting. And I probably shouldn't be getting them. So we adjusted the DMARC policy to remove our email address so we don't see those types of things. So that's the kind of risk with those forensic reports and why people haven't really used them. So I know it's probably, probably a little bit hard to see this. Can you? But what you're seeing here, and I'm actually going to change it to look like here so you can try to see it a little bit better. Move that out of the way, increase the size. Hopefully that's a little bit better in terms of being able to see it. But this is what the aggregate report looks like. And the aggregate report is basically going to be an XML document. So if you know how to ingest XML documents, hey, feel free to take a look at this and ingest it and try to ingest them. But this is basically just, raw data. It's going to tell you information about what domain is being used. It's going to tell you source IP addresses, what's going on, and these reports can be quite lengthy. I've seen reports that only have one IP address and maybe a total of 50 lines. I've seen reports that have millions of lines in it. Right. So eyeballing it is not the recommended way of doing it. Don't eyeball it. There are tools that are out there that can make it easily ingestible and easily readable. Those are the tools you want to use, and I'll show you some of those tools. This one here is a forensic report. So here you can see that like the top half here is actually showing you, and it looks like an actual message. And this one I'm willing to share because this was actually a spam email. So it's coming from this location right here. So it's sending the recipient authentication results. It gives you the DKIM signature. So this way you can see what domains are being used. So like MailChimp was being used in this type of situation. And in some cases, it will actually gives you like, the subject, new microtalk, American Society of Microbiology. It gives you all this information. That's where the whole privacy concern comes into play, because there's also the message body as well, which I cut off in this message. So this is why it's an issue and why people, a lot of organizations, a lot of receiving systems will not send back a forensic report. You'll get an aggregate report, but you won't get a forensic report back. So what are some tools you can use to read these? So some free tools. So I've seen already some people list, some tools that you could use. MX Toolbox, good tool. It's a nice tool that you can use. So that's, the direct link to DMARC report analyzer. DMARCian is my personal favorite. It's a personal opinion, not CyberWa's opinion or anyone else's. It's my own. Only reason I like it is because, the free tool, it's because I feel like from a logging perspective and reporting perspective, I feel like it's cleaner and I can actually know what I'm looking at. Easy DMARC is also a good one to use as well. And ValleyMail is also a great one as well to use. And so these are some of the free, I'm sure there's a lot of other ones. You can go on GitHub actually. So if you're familiar with GitHub and put in DMARC Analyzer or DMARC Report Analyzer, there's tons of them out there as well. Only thing with these free tools, you have to know what you're looking at. So you're the one who's interpreting it and interpreting what's going on with that message and what's going on. So they'll make it look clean for you. They'll make it look nice for you. They'll tell you what, they'll bunch them into different, like, oh, this is coming, these are Google associated, or these are this server associated, but interpretation is still up to you. Actions to do. So like if something is, if you're using SendGrid, it's not set up correctly. Well, how do I make it sure that it's set up correctly? That's for you to do, right? They have customer service, but they're not going to necessarily help you because they have paid services, right? DMARC,
Okay.
Point, Easy DMARC,
I got it.
Agari, Power DMARC, Redshift, Valley Mail, just to name a few. I put CyberWall up there. We're not a DMARC shop, but we can help you with the DMARC implementation and go through the process of doing it. But I put us under paid services because it is a paid service, but we'll help you through that process. And we actually with CyberWall, we've actually partnered with DMARCian. So we have a partnership there. So the tools we would end up using would be DMARCian's tools. So just to, be honest and frank about it. I know I have a few more minutes. Let me try to go through these last few slides really quick. One, it's a silver bullet. It's not, I mentioned this before, this only protects against a one type, and that's your domain spoofing. It's only protecting your domain. You need to use other security email mechanisms that are out there. There's other ones like if you DANE, MTSTS, some things to look at. BIMI is another one to look at. Yeah, Power DMARC is a good one too. It's not good for privacy. That's where I already mentioned with the forensic sides. That's where the privacy issue comes into play. The aggregate, that's why I say aggregate reports you want to get. If you use a third-party service for DMARC reporting, forensics send to yourself, don't send to them, just to prevent them from seeing things you don't want them to see. Starting implementation of DMARC may be relatively simple. Like I showed you, DNS, relatively simple. It's the reporting side, it's the analysis side, that's the hardest side. And you will, unless you know what you're doing, you may end up going to the cost side. I typically recommend go to the cost side, get the paid services, learn from them, have them teach you. And that's what I do from the CyberWall. I'm not just going to tell you, I'll teach you what I'm looking at. And then you have access to the tool itself. And then you just start using the tool on your own. I believe in teaching instead of just, telling you everything. It negatively impacts email. Only if you set up incorrectly, it will do so, yes. It's only for large entities. No, everyone needs to do it, from small organizations to Fortune 500 corporations. I know somebody asked about how the Fortune 500 corporations are doing. Last I checked, they're still not doing so well. .orgs are actually at the worst. I think the .orgs that someone did, I think Easy did, DMARC looked it up. Out of like 10 million domains, I think only, they said either 1 to 3% have actually implemented DMARC, which is not good. Anti-spam filters are enough. Anti-spam filters, you need them. They only go to a certain extent. You need layers, right? Defense in depth when it comes to email, spam filters, DMARC. There's the new one, MTSTS is a new one that's out there. Implement all of these technologies and put them up there. Other concerns with implementation is not enough resources, in which admittedly that it tends to be the case. If you're a small organization with one domain, this shouldn't take you too long to do, and they shouldn't be too costly to do. But when you get into subdomains, you have subdomains and multiple domains, yes, it's going to be very time consuming. I'm not going to lie to you about that. It will become time consuming, and it just helps to have someone there to help you go through that process and try to figure out at least where to start. Then eventually, as you learn through the process, then you start doing it on your own. But it's the reports that are the most time-consuming part of it. And putting in the DMARC policy is not that long, unless your change control process takes forever. But the reporting is where the most has to go into, and that's where, honestly, again, a lot of the costs can come into play. Some other things to take into account: mailing list and mail forwarders. There are things that can break DMARC. Forwarding messages that are DMARC protected can break, even if you just have SPF and DKIM. There's something called authenticated receive chain. If you want to look that up, but the only reason you will need to look up ARC is if you actually have a mailing list. So you have a mail list server, or you're a mail forwarder or something like that, then you should look up ARC. Otherwise you don't need to. Items to plan for, so we kind of talked about those. So just to wrap it up, and we're going up here. So some good resources: DMARC.org, they're the creators. they're the originators of it. So obviously they're going to have a lot of great information, a lot of great resources there. They have links to a lot of free tools as well. So, and like I mentioned, I worked for Global Cyber Alliance about 1.5 years ago. So I'm obviously going to point back to them. So a lot of that stuff is what so a lot of the stuff I created there, DMARC.globalcyberalliance.org. Again, a lot of good resources. It'll point to a lot of the stuff that I have listed here. So like I created a DMARC bootcamp. It's about 7 to 9 videos, about an hour long each. That will have this one as the introduction, so you can skip the introduction one and go jump to the second one. But the bootcamp will break down SPF and how to implement SPF, break down DKIM, how to implement DKIM, breaks down DMARC and how to actually go use DNS, Windows DNS, using bind DNS, and using a cloud service provider. I forget which one. But one of the cloud service providers, I think it's like Network Solutions, GoDaddy, one of those that I implemented DMARC on, so that we can see how so I implemented SPF, DKIM, and DMARC, so we can see actually how it actually goes into place into each one of those. So I highly recommend that boot camp, going through it. Admittedly, the data might be some things might be a little bit outdated, but majority of it, 90% of it, should be on point still. And then obviously I work for CyberWatch, so I'm going to point out CyberWatch services. Me being the DMARC person from GCA, I'm taking it over to CyberWatch. So we, as a paid service, we can help with the consulting side in terms of guiding you through the process, getting you set up. We can help you with the SPF DKIM, looking up how to do it, where to go, and things like that. And we partner with so DMARCian would be our backend reporting analysis. That's what we use for reporting. And we would give you access to that as well. So that way you have access to it and you can see the reports yourselves. So I apologize, I did go over. I can give the slides to Ken and Matt, and if you wanted, that way, if he wants to share the slides with everyone that's here, you're welcome to take the slides. There's no secret here that I have published on here or put on here. The boot camp, like I mentioned, will have that information on there as well. So I'm happy to stay on for a couple more minutes if people want to ask questions. If not, feel free to email me at shezhad@cyberwa.com. Pretty simple. Unless you don't know how to spell my first name, but I'll put it in the chat to everyone. But feel free to email me. But like I said, I will only go so far in terms of the questions, depending on the question that you might ask. Otherwise, I may just point you, just go to the GCA website and they have a ton of good resources there. So you may want to start there. And if you need help and you need, like a full-blown DMARC project, feel free to reach out to me. Yeah, the material I'll send out to Ken. I'll share it with Ken, and then Ken could put, I don't know, maybe you can put on the Discord channel or put it somewhere for anyone to access. I'm going to delete one slide because that's a old date on there. So DMARC equals pass with SPF equals soft fill and DKIM equals pass. Where is the soft fill coming from? So SPF equals soft fill. So that's good. So in your SPF, so you're seeing this in the message you've received. So if that's a message you received, that means the SPF soft fill is on the receiving side. But if this is within your own domain, then it's something with your SPF. And that's usually if you find a tilde. So there's an SPF, there's an all at the very end, there's an all. You'll see either tilde all or you'll see a dash all. Tilde all typically allows for soft fill. So there might be something not exactly 100% with the SPF record. So they put the tilde just to make. Google tends to recommend using the tilde all. If they use a dash all, then you're going to get a hard fill. So if the receiving side's SPF, when you look at it, you see a tilde, that's most likely where it's going on.
Can we do questions verbally, Shezhad?
Oh, yeah, go ahead. Yeah, that's fine.
No, I was just going to ask, because I see some of the large mail providers, SPF will fail just because it does, right? I think they just have so many different IPs that gets picked up. Is that kind of, do you see the same kind of thing? And
yeah, especially when you're on, SPF is, that's why I said it's like a whole beast on its own. Because people, SPF is restricted by DNS, right? Because you're using a DNS record, and DNS only allows up to 255 characters. Some will allow a little bit, and the newer ones will allow a little bit longer. But that's where it becomes more complicated, because you have all these IP addresses you have people tend to put listed in there. And there are workarounds to those kinds of situations. There's like groups, again, I hate to, you can do it on your own, and there's our recommendations. And in terms of time, that's that'd be like a whole nother, that'd be another presentation. But if you look at if you go to the boot camp and you go to the SPF presentation, in there I break down where some alternatives in terms of those types of situations where you have just too many IP addresses, where you have too many domains, and then it just won't work because it's just breaking in that sense. There's groups like, I think Easy DMARC does it. I think Redshift does it. Like they can handle your SPF records for you. They have something in the back end that they do to allow you to kind of bypass that DNS problem. So I wish I had a really good answer for SPF, but SPF does have some inherent problems, which unfortunately DMARC is going to inherit as well. It's receiving side. And okay, so going back to that, SPF equals soft velocity is receiving. So Gmail. So so it's receiving side. So whatever domain sent it, that's where the SPF that you need to look. You need to look at the SPF of the domain that sent the email. Let's see if I can go back and look. I think I got everything. If I missed one, then there's a lot of text here. So like I said, feel free to email me or contact me if you have any other questions.
Thank you for presenting this.